In the sweltering heat of the Vietnam jungle, a legend was born, but not in the way anyone expected. When a young, unassuming woman joined the elite ranks of the Navy SEALs, she was met with a chorus of doubt and mockery. They saw her, a slender figure with a quiet demeanor, and dismissed her as a fluke, a token gesture in a man's world. Her most peculiar habit became their favorite joke. She always carried meticulously folded maps, an anachronism in an era of advanced technology. They snickered, whispering about her a reliance on outdated methods, convinced she was out of her depth. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" one of them jeered. "Lost your way to the front lines?" Their laughter echoed through the dense foliage, a cruel soundtrack to her isolation. They had no idea that those maps were not a crutch, but a key to a mind that saw the battlefield in 3 dimensions, a mind that could calculate trajectories with chilling precision. They saw a cartographer. They would soon discover she was a ghost. The air in the training camp hung thick with humidity and the scent of sweat-soaked canvas. A new batch of recruits, all men, stood in rigid formation, their faces a mask of determination and bravado. They were the best of the best, handpicked for their physical prowess and unyielding will. Among them, a single figure stood out, not for her size, but for her quiet defiance. Her name was Lieutenant Evelyn Reed. At 5 feet 5 inches and 120 pounds, she was a wisp of a person next to the hulking frames of her male counterparts. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her green eyes, often downcast, held an intensity that belied her calm exterior. Evelyn was an anomaly, a woman who had not only passed the rigorous physical and mental tests but had excelled at them, shattering records that men had held for decades. Yet her presence was a constant source of friction. The Navy, in a progressive but deeply unpopular move, had initiated a pilot program to integrate female personnel into combat roles, and Evelyn was the first, a solitary pioneer in a sea of skepticism. The SEALs, a brotherhood forged in the fires of extreme hardship, saw her not as a teammate, but as a liability. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rhino Thorne was the most vocal of her detractors. A man built like a brick wall with a perpetually scowling face, he considered the program an insult to everything the SEALs stood for. "This isn't a damn social experiment," he grumbled to his buddy, Chief Warrant Officer David Viper Morales. "This is war. We don't need dead weight slowing us down." Viper, a more measured man with a thoughtful gaze, watched Evelyn from a distance. He didn't share Rhino's open contempt, but he harbored his own doubts. The SEALs' missions were too delicate, too unforgiving, for a rookie, let alone a woman. The first week was a gauntlet of physical punishment. Evelyn endured the same grueling runs, the same endless hours in the mud, and the same punishing obstacle courses. She never complained. When she fell behind on the team runs, a sadistic ritual where a recruit who failed to keep pace would be ostracized, she pushed harder, her face a mask of strain. She would finish every time last but never broken. The men, seeing her struggle, would offer no encouragement, only a cold shoulder. Their mockery was a silent, constant pressure. They would forget to save her a spot at the dinner table, accidentally trip her during drills, and make sure she knew in 100 small ways that she did not belong. Her one peculiar habit became the source of their endless jokes. Evelyn, unlike the other recruits who relied on the advanced and often temperamental GPS units, always carried a meticulously folded set of maps in a waterproof satchel. During navigation drills, while the others squinted at screens, she would unfold her maps, her fingers tracing the contour lines and terrain features with an almost reverent focus. "Look at her," Rhino would snicker, his voice a low rumble. "Gonna show us where the dinosaurs are buried?" The laughter would ripple through the ranks. One particularly intense night navigation exercise, the team was dropped deep in the jungle with a single objective: locate and secure a simulated enemy cache. The torrential downpour had rendered the GPS units useless, their screens flickering and dying in the relentless rain. The team was lost, disoriented in the impenetrable darkness. Panic began to set in. Rhino, in a fit of frustration, threw his GPS unit to the ground. "Useless damn thing," he roared. It was then that Evelyn, Her face calm and steady in the pale moonlight, unfolded her map. She didn't say a word, just pointed a single finger to a point on the chart. "We're here," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the rising tension. "And the objective is a half-mile due east, across the river." The men looked at each other, their faces etched with a mix of disbelief and skepticism. They had no choice but to follow her. It was a gamble, a desperate one. They plunged into the inky blackness, their fate in the hands of the woman they had so thoroughly dismissed. The jungle was a living, breathing thing, and in the dead of night, it was a predator. Every rustle of a leaf, every snap of a twig seemed amplified, a symphony of unseen dangers. The men followed Evelyn, their skepticism warring with the desperate need to complete the mission. She moved with an unnerving silence, her slight frame slipping through the dense foliage like a ghost. She was a stark contrast to their own clumsy movements, their gear clanking, their heavy boots thudding against the earth. Evelyn led them through a maze of tangled vines and treacherous mud, her flashlight beam a small solitary beacon, illuminating a path only she seemed to see. Her maps, now held tight in her hand, seemed to possess a magic that the GPS units lacked. She knew the terrain not just from a screen, but from memory. She had spent countless hours studying the topographical charts, memorizing every rise, every depression, every hidden stream and ridgeline. Her mind had become a three-dimensional model of the jungle floor, a living, breathing map. When they reached the river, a churning torrent swollen by the recent downpour, the men hesitated. The current was a beast, its roar echoing in the night. "We can't cross that, Lieutenant," Rhino said, his voice a low growl. "It'll sweep us away." Evelyn didn't respond. She simply pointed to a narrow, submerged log that spanned the gap a few yards downstream. It was almost invisible in the darkness, a testament to her keen observation skills. One by one they crossed, their hearts in their throats, the rushing water threatening to pull them under. Evelyn was the last to cross, her balance impeccable, her movements precise. On the other side, she consulted her map once more, her brow furrowed in concentration. 50 yards, she whispered, her finger tracing a line on the worn paper. Up a small incline, there should be a rock formation shaped like a tooth. "The cache is buried under the second tree to the left of it." The men exchanged glances. It sounded like an absurd guess, a wild shot in the dark. But they had come this far. They had to see it through. They followed her up the incline, their frustration mounting with every step. There was no tooth-shaped rock, just an endless expanse of trees and bushes. "I told you this was a waste of time," Rhino muttered, his voice laced with defeat. Just as he spoke, Viper's hand shot out, his fingers brushing against something. He shone his light, revealing a jagged, moss-covered rock formation that, in the right light, did indeed look like a monstrous tooth. The men stared, a flicker of grudging respect in their eyes. Evelyn walked to the second tree and began to dig. Within minutes, her shovel hit metal. The simulated enemy cache was there, just as she had said. The men stood in stunned silence, their bravado and skepticism replaced by a profound awe. They had been lost, cold, and on the verge of giving up. And this woman, this quiet, map-carrying lieutenant, had led them to their objective with a precision that was borderline supernatural. The air was different now. The mocking laughter was gone, replaced by a tense, respectful quiet. The mission was a success, but the victory was bittersweet. They had to face the fact that their preconceived notions had been completely and utterly wrong. Their prejudices had almost cost them the mission. As they began the long trek back to base, the men's whispers were no longer about her maps, but about her uncanny ability. "How did she do that?" one recruit asked. "She sees things differently," Viper said, his voice quiet. He watched her as she navigated the path back, her head bowed over the map, the light from her headlamp casting a pale glow on her face. He still had his doubts, but they were no longer about her competence. They were about something far more profound. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? She was an enigma, and he was determined to find out her secret. Back at base, the quiet respect for Evelyn was palpable, though still unspoken. The men no longer openly mocked her. They still kept their distance, a silent wall of professional detachment, but the venom was gone. The atmosphere had shifted from one of active hostility to a cold but respectful neutrality. Evelyn, for her part, remained unchanged. She went about her duties with the same quiet efficiency, her face a serene mask of concentration. The maps remained her constant companion, a testament to her unique old-school approach. One day, during a break in training, Viper found her sitting alone under the shade of a massive banyan tree, her head bent over a map. He approached her cautiously, the rustle of his boots on the dry leaves the only sound in the oppressive afternoon heat. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice low and steady, "that was some navigation you pulled the other night." Evelyn looked up, her green eyes holding a flicker of surprise before settling into their usual calm. "Thank you, Chief," she said. She didn't offer any more, but Viper persisted. "Where did you learn to do that? I've never seen anyone with your kind of instinct." Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tracing a line on the map. "My father was a cartographer," she said finally. "He worked for the National Geographic. He taught me how to read a map before I could read a book. He used to say a map isn't just a piece of paper. It's a living document. It tells a story. The contour lines, the terrain features, they all speak a language if you know how to listen." Viper was captivated. The story painted a picture of a childhood spent not with toys, but with charts and compasses, of a mind trained to see the world from a higher perspective. "So you've always been good at this?" he asked. "No," she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I've always had to be. In my old neighborhood, if you didn't know how to read a map, you'd get lost in a second. It's an inner-city thing." The conversation was a revelation for Viper. He had seen her as a caricature, a one-dimensional figure. Now he saw a person with a history, a reason for her particular set of skills. But he was still puzzled. Her navigation skills, while impressive, were not enough to justify her presence in the SEALs. The SEALs were known for their marksmanship, their ability to operate with surgical precision in the most hostile environments, and Evelyn had yet to prove herself in that domain. During the rifle drills, she was competent but not exceptional. She hit her targets, but she didn't stand out. The men, still holding on to their last vestiges of doubt, whispered that the maps were a fluke, that she was just a one-trick pony. The next phase of training was marksmanship, specifically long-range sniper qualification. It was the ultimate test of skill, patience, and mental fortitude. The range was a desolate, wind-swept plain, the targets a series of small, inconspicuous shapes scattered across the landscape, some as far as 1,000 yards away. The men, all seasoned shooters, lined up, their rifles resting on bipods. Their bravado returned, a confident swagger in their step. This was their domain. They were the hunters, the apex predators. They couldn't wait to see the cartographer fail. Evelyn took her position, her rifle, a standard-issue M40A1, looking almost too big for her. She didn't have the broad shoulders of the men, the muscle memory honed by years of firing heavy-caliber weapons. She looked small, vulnerable. Rhino and his crew snickered, their whispers laced with anticipation. "I'm telling you, she won't even be able to get a proper sight picture," Rhino said to Viper, his voice dripping with condescension. Viper didn't respond. He just watched, a flicker of an emotion he couldn't quite name in his eyes. He had seen her surprise them once before, and he had a gut feeling she was about to do it again. The commanding officer gave the order to begin. The first round cracked through the air, followed by another and then another, a symphony of destruction. The men were hitting their targets, but not with the consistency of a true marksman. The wind was a factor, and they were still adjusting. But when it was Evelyn's turn, she didn't just fire. She went still, her breath held, her eyes a single point of unblinking focus. She was not just looking at the target. She was looking through it. Evelyn didn't rush. She took her time, her movements precise and deliberate. She meticulously adjusted her scope, her fingers making minute clicks on the windage and elevation knobs. She tested the wind, not with a meter, but with a single small piece of string tied to her rifle barrel, a trick she had learned from a book on long-range shooting. She watched the dust motes dancing in the air, a silent, swirling testament to the wind's invisible force. The men, their own shooting finished, watched her with a mixture of impatience and open ridicule. "What's she doing?" Rhino scoffed. trying to knit the target a sweater. Then she exhaled, a long, controlled breath that emptied her lungs. Her body went completely still, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. There was a moment of profound silence, a pocket of stillness in the chaotic range. Then the rifle cracked, a single sharp sound that echoed across the plains. 1,000 yards away, a small puff of dust erupted from the center of the target, followed by the faint sound of a bell. Bullseye. The men stared, their mouths agape. It was a shot that professional snipers would have considered a miracle. It was an impossible shot for a rookie. The commanding officer, a grizzled veteran with a face like a road map of every battlefield he had ever fought on, simply raised an eyebrow. "Lucky shot," Rhino muttered, his voice barely audible. But the commander wasn't buying it. He knew luck, and this wasn't it. "Again," he said, his voice a low command. Evelyn didn't even acknowledge the words. She was already setting up for her next shot. She adjusted her scope, her focus unbroken. The rifle cracked again, and again, the bullseye was hit with chilling precision. Each shot was a perfect symphony of physics and skill. She wasn't just hitting the targets. She was annihilating them. She was hitting the center of the center. A stunned silence fell over the range. The men who minutes earlier had been sneering were now watching in rapt attention. This wasn't a fluke. This was a skill on a level they had never seen before. She didn't just read the wind. She felt it. She didn't just calculate the bullet drop. She knew it in her bones. She was a different kind of sniper. She was a ghost. She was a phantom. After her final shot, a small group of men, led by a stunned Viper, walked out to the range to inspect the targets. They were covered in small, perfectly round holes, all clustered so tightly around the center that they looked like a single gaping wound. "This is impossible," one of the men whispered, his voice full of a genuine, disbelieving awe. "No one can shoot like that." Viper, his own face a mask of shock, didn't respond. He just looked at the targets, a profound sense of realization washing over him. The maps. It wasn't just that she could read them. She could see them. She could see the topography, the wind currents, the subtle shifts in the Earth's rotation, and she could calculate all of it in her head. She saw the battlefield in 3 dimensions. The maps were not just a tool for navigation. They were a tool for targeting. He walked back to the firing line, his steps heavy with the weight of this new understanding. Evelyn was cleaning her rifle, her face still impassive. She didn't look for praise. She didn't need it. She had just proven her worth in the most brutal and undeniable way possible. The men who had mocked her for carrying maps now looked at them in a completely different light. They weren't a crutch. They were a weapon. They were the key to her chilling precision. She was not a cartographer. She was a human targeting computer, and they had been so blind, so caught up in their own prejudices, that they had almost missed it. The joke was no longer on her. It was on them. And a profound, unspoken fear began to creep into their hearts. What else was this woman capable of? The atmosphere at the base had changed irrevocably. The quiet respect for Evelyn had morphed into something akin to reverence. The men, especially Rhino, now actively sought her counsel. They would watch her during training, trying to decipher her methods, to understand the otherworldly stillness that descended upon her before she fired a shot. They no longer called her lieutenant or her. They called her Ghost. It was a moniker born of a mixture of awe and fear. Rhino, the most vocal of her former detractors, was now her most fervent defender. He saw her not as a liability, but as a secret weapon, a force of nature that had been hiding in plain sight. He had seen her hit a target from 1,000 yards in a crosswind, a shot he had considered impossible. He had seen her navigate a jungle with no light and no technology. He had seen her prove time and time again that she belonged. He had to know her secret, not just out of professional curiosity, but out of a deep, humbling need to understand the kind of mind that could see the world in such a unique way. He found her one evening, sitting alone in the mess hall, her map spread out on the table in front of her. "Ghost," he said, his voice hesitant. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She just nodded, her eyes returning to the map. He sat down, the space between them filled with a tense but not hostile silence. "Look," he said finally, his voice a low rumble, I owe you an apology. I was a real jerk. I didn't get it. I didn't see. Evelyn didn't respond. She just kept tracing a line on the map. What is it? He asked, his voice full of genuine curiosity. What's the trick? Evelyn finally looked at him, her gaze direct. There's no trick, Rhino, she said, her voice soft but firm. It's all in the math. The wind speed, the humidity, the temperature, the Coriolis effect, the Earth's rotation. All of it. It all has an impact. I'm just a human calculator. The map is just a blueprint. It's the variables that matter. I see them all at once. I can't explain it. It's just a different way of seeing. Rhino was astounded. He had never considered the Coriolis effect in his calculations. He had always relied on intuition and experience. She had taken a scientific approach, a cold, calculated one, and it had yielded results that bordered on the divine. The next day, during a simulated mission, the team was tasked with neutralizing a high-value target. The target was a small, moving boat, and the team had to take him out from a distance of 200 yards, a shot so difficult it was considered near impossible. Rhino, a seasoned sniper with dozens of successful kills, took the shot. He held his breath, squeezed the trigger, and watched the round fly wide. The target sped away, and the mission was a failure. Frustration was thick in the air. The commanding officer turned to Evelyn. "Ghost," he said, his voice a low command. "Your turn?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. She took her position, her face a mask of focus. She consulted her map, her finger tracing a line. "The river's current is creating a subtle drag on the target," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The wind is shifting at a 2-degree angle, and the humidity is causing a small rise in the air density." She adjusted her scope, her fingers making a series of minute clicks. She didn't seem to be looking at the target at all. She was looking at the entire environment, a complex web of invisible variables. She exhaled, her body going still. The rifle cracked. The round was a ghost in the air, a whisper of death. It traveled across the 200 yards, a journey that seemed to take an eternity. And then it hit. Not the boat, but the pilot. The boat veered, its engine sputtering, before it sank into the water. The men watched, their hearts in their throats. It was a kill shot. It was a shot that no one, not even the most seasoned sniper, would have attempted. It was a shot that proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that she wasn't just a sniper. She was an artist. She was a mathematician. She was a ghost. The mission was a success, but the cost was a profound, humbling realization. They were not just working with a new recruit. They were working with a legend in the making. A legend that had been forged in the fire of their own prejudice and doubt. The next mission would be real, and she would have to prove that her skills were not just for training, but for survival, and they would have to trust her with their lives. The real mission was in the heart of the jungle, a dense, unforgiving labyrinth of tangled vines and treacherous terrain. The team's objective was to extract a high-value asset, a foreign operative who had been compromised and was now a target for a ruthless enemy force. The SEALs were on the clock. The enemy was closing in, and the only way out was through an ambush-laden choke point. Viper and Rhino, the team's most experienced snipers, were positioned on a ridge overlooking the extraction point. Their job was to provide cover for the team on the ground. Evelyn, the ghost, was with them, her rifle at the ready. The air was thick with tension, the silence punctuated only by the distant, disquieting sounds of the jungle. Their radio crackled to life. The team on the ground was in trouble. The enemy had found them. "The extraction point was compromised. We have to move," Viper said, his voice low and urgent. "We're losing them." But Evelyn didn't respond. She was looking at her map, her eyes moving over the contour lines with a chilling intensity. She wasn't looking for a way out. She was looking for a way to turn the tide. "There's a shortcut," she said, her voice a whisper. "Through the caves. It's a risk, but it will put us behind them." The men on the ground had no choice. They were pinned down, their ammunition running low. They had to trust her. Viper and Rhino moved with her, their skepticism replaced by a grim, desperate trust. They descended into the earth, the darkness of the caves swallowing them whole. Evelyn led the way, her knowledge of the terrain now a matter of life and death. They emerged on the other side, just as Evelyn had predicted, behind the enemy. The ambush was now on them. The enemy, caught completely off guard, scattered. The SEALs on the ground used the opportunity to regroup and move toward the extraction point. But the fight was far from over. A single enemy sniper, a ghost in his own right, was still in position, his rifle singing death from 1,000 yards away. He was a professional, a master of his craft. He took down 2 of the team's men in rapid succession. The team was pinned down again, their lives hanging by a thread. "I have a shot," Viper said, his scope fixed on the enemy sniper's position. But the sniper was too far, too well hidden. "No," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the comms. "You'll miss. The wind is shifting again. It's a 3-degree angle." She didn't just see the wind. She felt it. "I've got it," she said, her voice calm and steady. "But I'll need a spotter." Viper didn't hesitate. He fixed his scope on the target, his heart pounding in his chest. Evelyn took a long, slow breath, her body going completely still. She didn't just calculate the bullet drop. She calculated the atmospheric pressure, the Coriolis effect, the subtle shift of the ground beneath her feet. She was not just a human calculator. She was a human computer, taking in and processing thousands of variables at once. Her mind was a map of the entire battlefield, a 3-dimensional model of the world she was trying to manipulate. The map in her hand was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a tangible manifestation of her mind, a physical representation of her superhuman skill. "Fire!" Viper said, his voice a low command. The rifle cracked. The round flew, a whisper of death, a ghost in the air. It was a shot that should have been impossible, a shot that defied all logic, all physics, all common sense. The enemy sniper, an unseen phantom of death, was taken down. The team on the ground, their lives saved by a single impossible shot, moved toward the extraction point. The mission was a success. They had done it. They had done the impossible. And it was all because of the woman they had once mocked for carrying maps. They had found out in the most brutal and undeniable way that those maps were not a crutch, but a key to a mind that saw the world in 3 dimensions, a mind that could calculate trajectories with chilling precision. They saw a cartographer. They had discovered she was the unit's best sniper, the Ghost. They had trusted her with their lives, and she had delivered. But now, as they looked at the map in her hand, they knew something else. She had not just saved them from an enemy. She had saved them from themselves. But who was this woman? Where did she go to learn to do this? And what other secrets was she keeping from them? And what would they do when they finally found out?